The academy was filled with voices. Young humans and aliens stood in long lines waiting for their names to be called. It was the first day of bonding, the ceremony where every student would be paired with a partner. A partner meant survival. A partner meant strength, and together they would train to face the dangers of the galaxy. Everyone was excited. Everyone wanted the strongest and most talented partners. But then she walked in. The alien girl, small and thin, with a limp in her step. Her skin was pale blue, her eyes were large and sad, and her left arm trembled as if it had no strength. Whispers began to rise from the crowd. "That's her." "The broken one," someone said. "She can't even walk straight." Another voice laughed. "She will never survive training," a boy muttered, shaking his head. The alien girl kept her head low. She had heard these words all her life. Everywhere she went, she was seen as weak, as useless, as something less than the others. Her people had cast her aside, and now here at the academy things were no different. Still, she wanted a chance. Just one chance to prove that she was more than her. Broken body. The great hall was bright, filled with banners of many species. Humans stood proudly, aliens of every kind showed off their skills. Some had wings, some had tails. Others had sharp claws or glowing skin. They were proud to show their power, but when the alien girl stood among them, all eyes turned cold. The headmaster spoke in a deep voice. "Today, each of you will choose your bond partner. Remember, your partner will be your other half, your shield, your sword, your life." The words carried across the room, and everyone felt the weight of them. One by one, names were called, and students quickly paired off. The strongest went with the strongest. The clever chose the clever. And soon the hall was filled with smiling faces with hands held together, but not hers. She stood alone, waiting, hoping, praying. Every time a name was called, she lifted her head, thinking, maybe, just maybe, someone would step forward to stand with her, but no one did. Instead, they looked away, some even laughed out loud. "She will drag you down," they whispered. No one would be foolish enough to bond with her. The girl's heart sank. Her chest felt heavy and her limp grew worse as she tried to stand tall. She could feel her throat closing as tears threatened to escape. But she would not cry. Not here, not in front of them. Crying would only prove their words right. So she clenched her trembling hand and stared at the floor. In the corner of the hall, one human boy watched quietly. He was not the strongest, not the tallest, not the most popular. In fact, he was often teased himself for being strange, for never following the rules of the crowd. But his eyes were sharp and his heart was steady. He saw something different. In the alien girl, not weakness, not failure, but a strength hidden deep. A strength no one else cared to see. The headmaster's voice grew louder. "Is there no one who will bond with her?" Silence filled the hall. Even the air seemed heavy with rejection. The alien girl stood alone in the center, small and broken, while the others turned their backs. Then, footsteps echoed, slow but firm. The human boy walked forward, his eyes locked. On her, gasps rose from the crowd. "What is he doing?" someone whispered. "Is he mad?" Another shouted, but the boy ignored them all. He stopped in front of the alien girl, and for the first time she lifted her head. Her wide eyes met his steady gaze. He held out his hand. "I'll take her," he said, his voice clear and strong. "The..." Hall erupted in laughter and shock. "Why would you choose her?" A student yelled. "She's worthless," shouted another. But the boy did not move, did not flinch. His hand remained open, waiting. The alien girl stared at him in disbelief. Her heart raced, her mind spun. No one had ever chosen her before. No one had ever stood beside her. Could this human really mean it? Slowly, with a trembling hand, she reached out and touched his. The room fell silent for a moment. The bond was made, and though the crowd mocked, though the whispers continued, something had changed. For the first time in her life, the alien girl was not alone. For the first time, someone had seen her not as broken but as worthy. She did not know why this human had chosen her, but in her heart, she felt a spark of hope. A spark that would grow into something far greater than anyone in that hall could ever imagine. And so the outcast had arrived, and her story had begun. The hall was still buzzing with shock after the bond ceremony. Students whispered to each other, voices dripping with disbelief. The human boy had chosen the outcast, the disabled alien girl no one else wanted. It was a choice that made no sense to them. Some laughed, some shook their heads, others stared in silence, unable to understand. But the boy did not care. His name was Daniel, a young human cadet with sharp eyes and a calm strength that many ignored. He was not the strongest in the academy, not the fastest and not the loudest. Yet there was something about him, something stubborn, that made people wary of crossing him. And now he had bonded with the weakest girl in the hall. To others it was madness, but to Daniel it was simple. He saw something in her that no one else bothered to look for. The alien girl, her name whispered softly as Lyra, walked beside him with her head lowered. Her steps were uneven, her damaged leg slowing her down. She did not dare look around at the mocking faces, but inside her heart, confusion burned brighter than shame. Why would this human choose her? Why risk everything on someone broken? As they left the great hall, the sound of laughter followed them. "The broken pair," someone sneered. "They won't last a week." Another voice called. The cruel words stabbed at Lyra. But Daniel did not flinch. He walked forward steadily, his hand lightly supporting her when she stumbled. To him, the voices of the crowd were nothing but empty noise. When they reached the training quarters, Daniel stopped and turned to her. His eyes were steady, his voice calm. "Do you know why I chose you?" he asked. Lyra froze, uncertain if she should answer. Her throat tightened and she whispered, "No, I don't." Daniel leaned closer, his voice low but firm. "Because I don't see weakness when I look at you." Lyra blinked in shock, unable to believe his words. "All my life, they've only seen my broken body," she whispered. Daniel shook his head. "That's because they don't know how to look deeper. But I do, and I think you're stronger than you realize." Those words struck her like lightning. No one had ever spoken to her like that. For the first time, someone saw her not as a burden, but as something worth standing beside. She wanted to believe him. She truly did. But fear held her heart. What if she failed him too? What if she proved everyone right? That night, as the academy lights dimmed, the new pairs trained in the courtyard. Strong students showed off their skills, blasting targets, leaping walls, and sparring with ease. Daniel and Lyra stood apart, their partnership the focus of cruel laughter. "Watch her fall," one alien boy mocked. "She can't even lift a blade," another joked. But Daniel only tightened his grip on the wooden practice staff in his hand. "Let them laugh," he murmured to Lyra. "We don't need their approval, we'll write our own story." He handed her a smaller training staff. Her hands shook as she held it, her grip weak. The first swing she attempted was clumsy, and she almost fell. Laughter exploded around them. Lyra's face burned with shame, her eyes watering. But Daniel stepped forward, steadying her hand. "Don't listen to them, just listen to me," he said firmly. "Every swing, every step, we'll do it together, one at a time." Hours passed, and while the other students mocked and jeered, Daniel stayed by her side. He corrected her grip, adjusted her stance, and encouraged her every time she stumbled. And slowly, very slowly, she began to improve. Her strikes grew sharper, her steps steadier. The laughter around them faded into the background as determination filled her heart. For the first time, she believed she might be able to stand, not just beside him, but against anyone. When training ended, the students returned to their quarters. Some still mocked them, others shook their heads. But Daniel and Lyra walked together in silence, the bond between them already growing stronger with every step. That night, Lyra lay awake in her bed, staring at the ceiling of the dormitory. Her body ached, her arm throbbed, but her heart felt strangely light. The words Daniel had spoken echoed. In her mind, "You're stronger than you realize." She clenched her fist softly, whispering to herself, "Maybe he's right. Maybe I can be more." Outside, the academy loomed large, a place of trials and danger. Ahead of them lay tests that would break even the strongest of students. And yet, deep inside, a new fire had begun to burn. Lyra was no longer standing alone. She had someone who chose her when no one else would. someone who saw worth where the galaxy saw only weakness. And though the future was uncertain, one truth became clear that night. The human's choice had changed everything. It was the beginning of a story that no one in that academy would ever forget. The bond between Daniel and Lyra was sealed, but the academy did not welcome them. Everywhere they went, whispers followed. The other students smirked, laughed, and pointed at them as if they were a joke. Some called them the broken pair. Others said, they'll never survive the trials. The cruelty was sharp, and though Lyra tried to ignore it, each word struck her heart like a blade. Training days began early, and the fields outside the academy buzzed with activity. Pairs sparred, climbed, ran, and pushed their bodies to the limit. Most students showed off their strength proudly, eager to prove they were the best. But when Lyra and Daniel entered the training grounds, heads turned, mocking voices rose again. "Look, the human babysits the cripple," one sneered. "Maybe she can hold his water bottle while he trains." Another laughed. Lyra's face burned with shame, her body trembling. But Daniel only placed a hand on her shoulder and whispered, "Ignore them. They don't matter." The first exercise of the day was the obstacle course. Tall walls, rope climbs, fire pits, and balance beams stretched out before them. It was designed to test speed, strength, and focus. Pairs charged forward, racing each other, shouting in triumph as they cleared obstacles. Daniel and Lyra stepped up to the starting line. Already, the crowd snickered. "She'll trip before she takes 3 steps." Someone said, "She'll drag him down with her." Another muttered. The whistle blew, and Daniel shot forward, moving with steady precision. But Lyra stumbled at the first hurdle, her leg giving way. Gasps and laughter erupted. She fell, hard, pain shooting through her body, but before she could even push herself up, Daniel was beside her. He extended his hand without hesitation, pulling her back to her feet. "Again," he said firmly, his voice calm but unyielding. Lyra nodded, weakly, tears stinging her eyes, and together they climbed over the hurdle. They were slower than everyone else, far slower, but step by step they kept moving. By the time they reached the rope climb, most students had already finished. The others stood in groups, watching and laughing as Lyra struggled to grip the rope. Her arms shook violently, her hands slipping again and again. Daniel stood below, calling up to her, "Don't let go, I'm here, keep trying." But her body betrayed her, and she slid down, falling into his arms. The crowd roared with laughter. "She can't even climb a rope," a girl shouted. "What a waste," cried another. Daniel's jaw tightened, but he did not lash out. He simply turned to Lyra, who was shaking with both exhaustion and humiliation. "Listen to me," he said softly but firmly. "They laugh because they're afraid of what you might become if you keep going." She looked at him in disbelief. "Afraid of me?" "Yes," he answered, his eyes unwavering. "Because you have something they don't. Heart, and one day that will matter more than muscle." Something stirred inside her then, a spark of defiance. She clenched her fists and nodded. "I'll try again," she whispered. This time, with Daniel's guidance, she made it higher before slipping. She didn't reach the top, but she climbed farther than anyone expected. And though the crowd mocked her still, Daniel smiled. "You're already stronger than yesterday," he told her. And in that moment, she began to believe it too. Days passed, and the whispers never stopped. Every mistake she made, every stumble, became the Academy's favorite joke. But Daniel refused to let her drown in their cruelty. He trained with her in secret after hours, when the training grounds were empty and the stars shone above. He taught her human survival tricks, how to use her smaller size to slip past an enemy, how to balance her weight to steady her limp, how to fight smarter instead of harder. At first, she struggled, falling again and again, but slowly, she began to adapt. Her movements grew sharper, her confidence steadier. For every insult the others threw, Daniel gave her 10 words of encouragement. Yet the more she improved, the more the whispers turned bitter. "They must be cheating," some students muttered. "No way the broken girl could last this long." Others grumbled. It no longer mattered to them that she tried, only that they kept her beneath them. But Daniel and Lyra pressed on, ignoring the poison around them. Together they built something the others could not see: trust, patience, and a bond stronger than mockery. One evening, after a long day of training, Lyra stood outside the dorm staring at the horizon. The twin moons of the planet glowed softly, and for the first time she let herself smile. "They still hate me," she whispered. "But I don't care as much anymore." Daniel stood beside her, arms crossed, eyes on the same horizon. "They'll always whisper," he said. "But whispers can't stop us, not if we keep moving forward." She looked at him, her heart heavy with gratitude. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. "Why me?" Daniel finally turned his gaze to her, his voice steady. "Because I'd rather stand with someone who fights every day just to take one step, than with someone who never struggles but has no heart." Those words sank deep into her soul, and, for the first time since she arrived at the academy, Lyra felt something powerful rise within her. Pride. She was still mocked, still doubted, still broken in their eyes, but in Daniel's eyes she was becoming something greater, and maybe, just maybe, the galaxy would one day see it too. The academy had been preparing its students for weeks. Every exercise, every obstacle, every grueling night of training was only a warm-up. Now the first true trial had arrived, the trial of fire. It was a test designed to break the weak and prove the strong. Only those who passed would move forward toward becoming guardians of the galaxy. The announcement spread like lightning, filling the academy with tension. Students whispered nervously, but excitement sparkled in their eyes. For most, this was their chance to shine. But for Daniel and Lyra, it was different. For them, this was survival. The crowd of students looked at them with cruel grins. "This will be their end." One alien boy laughed. "She won't even make it past the first flame," another sneered. Lyra heard every word, her chest tightening, her damaged leg trembling. But Daniel placed a steady hand on her shoulder. "Don't listen," he said quietly. "We'll face it together." The trial of fire began at sunset. The training grounds transformed into a simulation zone. Flames burst across the field. Bridges of burning steel swayed over pits of fire, and towers crumbled into sparks and smoke. The air was thick with heat, making every breath heavy. The rules were simple. Reach the end, alive, with your partner. Failure meant expulsion. The headmaster's voice boomed, "Let the trial begin." Pairs rushed forward, shouting as they leapt over burning gaps. Some used their alien powers to shield themselves. Others relied on speed and strength. The scene was chaos, filled with fire and screams. Daniel gripped Lyra's hand tightly, guiding her through the flames. Her heart pounded, her body shook, and sweat poured down her face, but she forced herself to keep moving. For once, she didn't want to be left behind. The first obstacle was a bridge of steel plates swaying over a pit of fire. Other pairs sprinted across with ease, but when Lyra stepped onto the bridge, her leg buckled. The bridge wobbled dangerously, sparks flying. Students on the far side pointed and laughed. "She'll fall." Someone shouted, "Drop her and save yourself, human." Another yelled. Lyra's eyes filled with panic, her grip slipping on the hot railing, but Daniel's voice cut through the chaos. "Look at me, not at them. You can do this." She focused on his eyes, steady and calm, and forced one step forward, then another. Together, step by step, they crossed, slower than everyone else, but alive. The second challenge came fast, a wall of fire blocking the path. Pairs dashed through with protective shields or alien gifts, but Daniel and Lyra had none. Lyra froze, her body trembling. The heat was unbearable, the flames licking higher. Her instincts screamed to turn back. Daniel crouched beside her, his voice strong but calm. "Your people, they see differently, don't they? You told me once you can feel energy where others can't." Lyra's wide eyes blinked in shock. "Yes, but it's faint, like whispers," she admitted. "Then use it," he urged. "Find the weak point in the fire, guide us through." Lyra closed her eyes, blocking out the noise, the laughter, the heat. Slowly, she felt it, the rhythm of the flames, the currents of heat shifting like waves. Her senses lit up, guiding her toward a narrow gap where the fire was weakest. She opened her eyes and pulled Daniel's hand. "This way," she cried. They dashed forward, weaving through the flames, and though the heat seared their skin, they emerged on the other side, coughing but alive. Gasps rose from the students who had expected them to fail. The trial pressed on, each obstacle deadlier than the last. Collapsing towers of stone, firestorms raining from above and shifting ground that split beneath their feet. Again and again Lyra faltered, her legs slowing her down, her arms shaking. And again, Daniel pulled her back to her feet, refusing to let go. The crowd watching from the stands mocked them at every stumble. But slowly, a new tone began to creep into their voices, not just mockery but surprise. They were still in the game. The broken pair had not fallen. Finally, they reached the last challenge. A wide gap stretched before them, flames roaring below. The only way across was a collapsing bridge of stone, pieces crumbling with every second. Strong students leapt across, with ease, their laughter echoing as they reached the finish line. Daniel stared at the gap, then at Lyra. Her face was pale, sweat dripping, her body trembling. I can't, she whispered. "Yes, you can," Daniel said firmly, gripping her hand. "I'll jump with you. We'll land together, trust me." She shook her head, fear rising. "What if I fall?" "Then I'll fall with you," he said, his voice steady. "But I won't let go." The bridge crumbled further, time running out. Daniel tightened his grip, his heart pounding. "On 3, he said. 1, 2, 3. They leapt, the fire roaring beneath them, stones shattering in the heat. For a terrifying moment, Lyra's foot slipped on the crumbling edge, but Daniel pulled her forward with all his strength. They tumbled onto solid ground, rolling across the dirt, gasping for air. The crowd erupted, some in shock, some in disbelief. They had made it. The headmaster's voice echoed, "Daniel and Lyra, you pass." Lyra lay on the ground, staring at the sky, her chest rising and falling. She could hardly believe it. She had survived. She had done what no one believed she could. And deep inside her, a new flame burned, not of fire, but of hope. For the first time, she thought maybe she was not broken after all. The trial of fire was over. The students returned to the academy grounds, cheering and boasting about their victories. But not everyone was celebrating. Some stared at Daniel and Lyra with disbelief, their laughter gone, replaced by unease. The pair they had mocked, the broken girl and the foolish human, had survived. It was something none of them had expected. Lyra, however, was not celebrating either. Her body ached, her leg throbbed, and her arms shook from exhaustion. Every step she took felt heavy, as if fire still clung to her skin. But in her heart burned a quiet pride. For the first time in her life, she had proved them wrong. That night, the academy's medics gathered the students who had been injured. Burns, cuts, and bruises were common after the trial. Daniel helped Lyra walk into the infirmary, his arm steady around her shoulders. She tried to wave him off, embarrassed, but her body betrayed her, collapsing against him. "Don't push yourself," he said softly. "You've done more than enough today." The medic, a tall alien with silver skin, examined Lyra. He checked her leg, her arm, her trembling body. His face grew dark as he pressed his hand against the scars hidden beneath her skin. "These are not natural," he muttered. Daniel frowned. "What do you mean?" The medic's sharp eyes lifted. "These wounds, they are not from birth, they are the result of experiments." The words cut through the air like a blade. Lyra froze, her eyes widening. Her hands shook as memories she had tried to bury clawed their way back into her mind. Cold tables, sharp instruments, shadows standing over her. The voices that told her she was weak, useless, broken. But in truth, she had not been born broken. She had been made that way. Daniel's chest tightened, fury rising like fire inside him. "Experiments?" he repeated, his voice low and dangerous. "Yes," the medic confirmed. "Someone hurt her, damaged her body, took away her strength. Daniel turned to Lyra, his heart breaking at the look on her face. Tears welled in her eyes, her body trembling as she whispered, They made me like this. For years she had believed she was cursed, that she was simply weak. For years she had carried the shame of being broken. But now the truth was out. Her weakness was never hers. It was forced upon her. And the ones who had done it had left her to suffer, abandoned and outcast. Daniel clenched his fists, rage burning through him. They stole from you, he said fiercely. They tried to take your future, your life. Lyra shook her head, her tears falling. No one ever cared, not my people, not the academy, no one. Until you. Daniel knelt beside her, his voice steady, his eyes blazing with determination. Then I'll care. I'll protect you. I'll make sure no one ever hurts you again. The medic placed a hand on Lyra's shoulder, his tone softer. Now, the scars may never fully heal, but strength is not only in the body, it is in the spirit. Daniel looked at her, his voice quiet but firm. And your spirit is stronger than anyone here. The days that followed were heavy with whispers. Rumors spread across the academy like wildfire. Some students mocked her even more, calling her a test subject or a failed experiment. Others looked at her with unease, their eyes filled with curiosity and fear. But Lyra no longer lowered her head. The weight of shame she had carried for so long began to lift, because now she knew the truth. She was not weak by nature. She had been made weak, and if they had taken her strength away once, she could fight to take it back. Daniel pushed her harder in training, but always with patience. He adapted exercises to rebuild her balance, her reflexes, her endurance. At night he encouraged her, reminding her of every step she had taken forward, and little by little, she began to feel change. Her strikes grew more precise, her body steadier, her eyes brighter with determination. She was no longer just surviving, she was growing. Yet the shadow of the past still haunted her. Sometimes in the dark of night she would wake shaking, the memory of cold hands and cruel laughter echoing in her mind. Daniel would sit beside her, steady as always. They don't control you anymore, he reminded her. You are more than what they tried to make you. And though the fear never fully left, his words wrapped around her like a shield. But outside their quiet corner of strength, danger was brewing. Whispers of raiders spread through the academy walls, whispers of the very group who had once experimented on her. They had not vanished, they had not forgotten, and if they returned, they would not only threaten the academy, they would come for her. One evening, as Daniel and Lyra stood overlooking the stars, she spoke quietly. I used to hate myself for being broken, she admitted, but now I think maybe I can be more. Daniel glanced at her, pride in his eyes. You already are, he said simply. And in that moment, with the truth revealed and her strength slowly returning, the outcast began to transform into something greater. Not just a survivor, but a fighter. Not just a weak girl, but a force that one day the galaxy would never forget. The academy had grown restless. The students trained harder than ever. The instructors shouted louder, and the walls seemed to tremble. With tension, rumors spread through the corridors like smoke. Whispers of raiders moving across the galaxy. Whispers of a shadow from the past. Most dismissed the tales as exaggerations, but for Lyra, every rumor cut deep. She knew the truth. If the raiders were near, they would be looking for her. Daniel noticed the fear in her eyes, though she tried to hide it. Talk to me, he said one evening as they sparred under the training lights. Her staff clattered weakly against his, her focus broken. They're coming back, aren't they? She whispered. Daniel lowered his weapon, his jaw tightening. If they are, then we'll face them together, he said, his voice steady. But inside, he was burning with fury. The ones who had experimented on her, who had stolen her strength, who had broken her, they were not just ghosts from her past, they were enemies still alive, and they would come. Days later, the alarm finally rang. It began with a low rumble in the night. the Academy's defense systems trembling. Then the skies lit up with fire, ships descending from the clouds like shadows of doom. The raiders had arrived. Panic spread across the Academy. Students rushed to grab weapons. Instructors shouted orders. The once proud halls filled with fear. The strong students who had mocked Lyra now trembled, their bravado fading in the face of real war. Explosions shook the ground, fire tore through the walls, and the raiders stormed the Academy with brutal force. Lyra froze at the sound of their voices. Cold, harsh, familiar voices that haunted her dreams. She could almost see the shadowed rooms, the instruments of pain, the cruel laughter. Her breath caught, her body shaking. Daniel gripped her hand, tightly pulling her back to the present. "They don't control you anymore," he said firmly, his eyes locked on hers. "You're not their prisoner. You're mine, and together we fight." The words steadied her, if only a little. She nodded, fear still clawing at her chest, but determination rising above it. For the first time, she would not run. She would not be their victim again. The battle raged through the Academy grounds. Students fought desperately, some falling, some fleeing. The raiders were stronger, faster, merciless. They laughed as they struck down cadets, tearing through defenses as even the instructors struggled to hold the line. Daniel and Lyra fought side by side. Daniel's staff cracked against raider armor, his movements sharp and precise. Lyra stumbled at first, her legs slowing her, but her senses guided her. She felt the flow of energy around her, the movement of footsteps, the shifts in the air. She used it to dodge, to strike at the right moment. Her blows, though not as strong as others, landed true. Together they covered each other's weaknesses, moving like two halves of one soul. Still, the battle was brutal. A massive raider commander stepped forward, his weapon glowing with deadly energy. His eyes locked on Lyra, recognition sparking in his cruel grin. "There you are," he sneered, his voice echoing like thunder. "Our little project." Lyra's blood turned cold, her body shaking. The commander raised his blade. "Time to bring you back where you belong." Daniel stepped between them, his eyes blazing. "She doesn't belong to you," he spat. The commander laughed, towering over him. "You think you can stop me, human?" Daniel tightened his grip on his weapon, his voice steady. "I don't need to stop you alone, she'll stop you with me." The fight exploded. The commander swung with crushing strength, sparks flying as Daniel barely blocked. The force knocked him back, pain shooting through his arms. Lyra cried out, rushing to his side. The commander sneered. "Pathetic, you protect her, but she is broken." But Lyra's fear twisted into anger, her trembling body hardening. "No," she said, her voice rising with power she had never felt before. "I am not broken, not anymore." She moved faster than she thought possible, her senses guiding her every strike. The energy around the commander lit up like fire in her vision. She saw his weaknesses, the gaps in his movements, the flaws in his defense. For the first time, her scars did not hold her back. They fueled. Her every strike she landed was a rejection of the past, every blow a scream of defiance. Daniel fought beside her, his strength and her precision combining. Together, they forced the commander back, step by step. The students who had mocked them now watched in stunned silence. The weakest pair, the broken girl and her stubborn human, were standing against the strongest enemy. With one final cry, Lyra struck, her staff shattering the commander's blade. Daniel followed with a crushing blow that sent him sprawling to the ground. The raider commander lay defeated, his shocked eyes fixed on the girl he once called broken. "You were never meant to survive," he hissed weakly. Lyra stood tall, her chest rising with fierce pride. "Then it's a shame for you, because I did," she answered, her voice unshaken. The battlefield grew quiet for a moment, the raiders retreating. As their leader fell, students stared, their fear mixed now with awe. Daniel and Lyra stood side by side, bloodied, bruised, but unbroken. And for the first time, no one dared to laugh. But deep inside, Lyra knew this was only the beginning. The raiders would not stop. They would return, stronger and hungrier. And when they did, she and Daniel would be ready, for she was no longer just an outcast, no longer just a victim. She was a fighter, and with her human beside her, she would face the galaxy itself, if she had to. The battlefield was silent. Smoke curled into the night sky, the academy's walls scorched and broken. Students stood scattered, weapons trembling in their hands, their faces pale with fear and exhaustion. But in the center of it all, two figures remained upright. Daniel, the stubborn human, bruised and bloodied, and Lyra, the alien girl once mocked as useless, stood side by side. The Raider commander lay at their feet, defeated, his broken weapon glowing faintly in the dirt. His retreating soldiers vanished. Into the sky, their ships nothing but fading shadows. The Academy had survived not because of its strongest, not because of its proudest, but because of the pair that no one had believed in. At first, there was only silence. Students stared in, shock, unable to process what they had witnessed. Then whispers began to spread. The broken girl, she stood against them. She fought like a warrior, and that human, he chose her when no one else would. Lyra's chest heaved, her body aching, but her eyes burned with a light no one had ever seen before. She looked at Daniel, her voice quiet but steady. "We did it," she said. Daniel nodded, a tired smile breaking across his face. "No, you did it," he answered, pride in his tone. The instructors soon arrived, rallying the students, tending to the wounded, and repairing the shattered walls. Yet even they could not ignore what had happened. The headmaster, stern and unshaken through every trial, stood before the crowd. His voice echoed through the ruined grounds. "Today we saw bravery where we expected weakness, strength where we saw none. Daniel and Lyra have reminded us that a warrior is not judged by the body but by the heart." Those words struck the Academy like a storm. The same students who had once mocked now lowered their heads in shame. The ones who had laughed at Lyra could not meet her eyes. But she did not look at them with anger, only with quiet determination, because for the first time she no longer needed their approval. She knew who she was, and nothing they said could take that away again. Days passed, and the Academy slowly returned to its routine. But something had changed. Everywhere Daniel and Lyra walked, eyes followed them. Not with mockery, but with awe and respect. Some whispered about the fire in Lyra's strikes, others about the unbreakable bond between her and the human. Stories grew larger, with each telling until the truth and the legend began to blur. To some she was still the outcast, the girl who had once limped in shame, but to others she was becoming something far greater, the symbol of resilience, the proof that the weak could rise and stand against giants. Lyra herself felt the change. Most deeply at night, she no longer lay awake drowning in old memories of cold labs and cruel hands. Instead, she dreamed of the fire she had walked through, the enemy she had faced, and the bond she now carried. The scars on her body no longer felt like chains. They felt like marks of survival, proof of battles endured and won. One evening, as the twin moons shone above the Academy, Daniel and Lyra stood on the outer wall gazing at the stars. The galaxy stretched endless and dark before them, but for the first time, Lyra did not feel small. "Do you ever wonder," she asked softly, "why you chose me that day in the hall, when everyone else turned away?" Daniel turned, his eyes steady. "Because I saw something no one else saw," he answered. "And now the galaxy is starting to see it too." Lyra lowered her gaze, her heart swelling. She thought of the girl she used to be, the one who had limped into the hall head down waiting for rejection. That girl no longer existed. In her place stood someone new, someone stronger, someone ready. Far beyond the Academy walls, whispers of the raid and the strange pair who fought it spread from planet to planet. Some dismissed it as rumor, others as exaggeration. But slowly the tale began to grow. A human who chose the weakest alien, and an alien who rose from brokenness to face the galaxy's darkness. A partnership no one had believed in, but one that had changed everything. The legend of the Outcast was born. And though Lyra still carried fear, still carried pain, she also carried hope. Hope that one day others like her, the abandoned, the broken, the forgotten, would hear her story and realize they too could rise. She turned to Daniel, her voice quiet but filled with certainty. This is only the beginning. He smiled, his hand resting on the railing as he looked at the stars. Then let's write the rest together. The night sky stretched before them, endless and waiting. The galaxy would throw more trials, more battles, more enemies. But Lyra no longer feared the future, for she was not alone. She was no longer the outcast hiding in the shadows. She was the legend walking into the stars,